Imagine a warrior so feared that his name alone sent entire armies into retreat. Not kings, not emperors, but armored knights, sworn to fight to the death, their blades dripping with both honor and terror. Now, what if I were to inform you that these fierce warriors are not only swordmasters, but strategic thinkers, politicians, and symbols of an age ruled by steel and warfare on the battlefields? Knights. They are imagery of chivalric, romantic, and noble quests. Shining armor, gallant tournaments, oaths to protect the weak. But history's a more complex tale. Behind the glitter of armor is a world of struggle, betrayal, and intense competition. If such images are only seen for what they are, then this claim might have some basis, but with further meaning than on first view. In the medieval role, knights not only were warriors, they were the instruments of states and the men-at-arms of kings, and the beasts of the battlefield. From among them, certain men stood out, and at the mention of their names, one shuddered and marveled. These were the most feared, most ruthless, and most deadly of all knights in medieval history. Today, we take a trip into their world. It could be from the deserts of the Holy Land to frozen fields of Eastern Europe, or it could be English castles to French battlefields. We find the real legends of the sword, the rise of the knight. The history of the knight begins in the anarchy of the early Middle Ages. After Rome fell, Europe split into countless kingdoms in the chaos of the early Middle Ages. Power was not through laws or treaties, but through arms. Mounted warriors, horsemen in armor, became the primary shock troops of Europe during the 8th and 9th centuries. A knight was more than a soldier. He happened to be elite. Training started from childhood. At the age of 7, a boy went into some noble household as a page. By 14, he was already a squire, learning about swordplay and horsemanship and what loyalty meant. Only after years of service that were equally arduous would he ever be dubbed a knight, sworn to serve God, Lord, and King. Nor let us be fooled by romantic ideals of honor. Knights were warriors, they were bred for battle. And some became so infamous that their names are remembered centuries later. William Marshal, the greatest knight. We begin in 12th century England with William Marshal, often called the greatest knight who ever lived. This left no inheritance to him except for his sword, so that he might make his destiny. By the time he was in his 20s, he had won every tournament against the knights throughout Europe and had gathered a fortune. But the tournaments were a mere practice, for it was in battle that his true legend was made. Marshal fought in over 500 tournaments and numerous battles or little wars in the service of no fewer than 4 kings. At the age of 70, when most men of his era had long disappeared, William was still leading armies. Chroniclers inform us that he once held off an entire French cavalry charge almost single-handedly. Yet for all his loyalty and bravery, Marshal was admired. His sword was like an identity of his fighting, and all the imaginations knew that to stand before him was a very big task. He died in 1219, and even those against him spoke highly of him. William Marshal showed what it meant to be a knight, but had the ways of a strong fighter, a balance few others could master. Richard the Lionheart, the Crusader King. No listing of famous knights can ever be considered complete if it does not name Richard I of England, more popularly known as Richard the Lionheart. He was noted for great strength and valor. He became a significant figure in the Crusades. At the age of 70, when most men of his era had long disappeared, William was still leading armies. Chroniclers inform us that he once held off an entire French cavalry charge almost single-handedly. Yet for all his loyalty and bravery, Marshal was admired. His sword was like an identity of his fighting, and all the imaginations knew that to stand before him was a very big task. He died in 1219, and even those against him spoke highly of him. William Marshal showed what it meant to be a knight, but had the ways of a strong fighter, a balance few others could master. Richard the Lionheart, the Crusader King. No listing of famous knights can ever be considered complete if it does not name Richard I of England, more popularly known as Richard the Lionheart. He was noted for great strength and valor. He became a significant figure in the Crusades. At the Battle of Arsuf in 1191, leading a cavalry charge against the enemy left no doubt about his ability to lead men, as well as fight with tactical competence. Richard was known for his great prowess at the sword, with strength reputed to blows he could deliver. But he was also noted as a most rigorous fighter. After one siege, when finally offered negotiations that fell through, he took measures against so many people that had such dire consequences. Though he was King of England, Richard hardly remained in his kingdom for 6 months. His real passion was for war, and his life was all one continual warfare. To his followers, he was a lion, courageous and indomitable. To his enemies, he was a monster, a knight who lived only for blood and glory. The Black Prince, the English scourge. Fast forward to the 14th century. The 100 Years' War between England and France raged across Europe. Out of this brutal conflict emerged one of the most feared knights of all time, Edward of Woodstock, the Black Prince. Wearing black armor, terror was struck into French hearts by Edward. A mere 16 heresy saw him command English forces in the Battle of Crécy in 1346, when a greatly larger French army was utterly cut to pieces by English longbows and disciplined knights. He later captured the French king at Poitiers. However, it was not merely his reputation for being good, but for being bad. Setting out campaigns in France, the Black Prince had instructed the use of scorched earth tactics, torching villages along with crops and leaving entire regions starving. He was, however, a hero to the English, honorable, brave, and unbeatable in combat. The dualism of the knight is manifest. On one hand is heroism, on the other, horror. Knights of the Temple, the Templars. No discussion of knights can ignore the Knights Templar. Founded at the beginning of the 12th century to protect pilgrims in the Holy Land, the Templars quickly became the most disciplined and feared military order of the Crusades. They wore white mantles with red crosses. They charged into battle with zeal. Templars were well acquainted with the art of fighting. They never turned their backs, even when outnumbered. At the Battle of Hattin in 1187, almost every captured Templar met a terrible fate, because maintaining such ferocity in combat would pose a threat. For close on 200 years, Templars served as the shock troops of Christendom. Great wealth, secrecy, added to battlefield discipline made them both respected and feared across Europe. Even kings feared them, until King Philip IV of France dismantled the order in 1307. But their legend remains. Knighthood was practiced in many places other than Western Europe. During the 15th century, there were considerable struggles between the Ottoman Empire and Christian kingdoms in the Balkans. One of the most famous individuals to emerge from this period was Vlad III of Wallachia, who later gained the epithet the Impaler. Vlad was committed to the protection of Christian lands. He belonged to the Order of the Dragon. Indeed, this commitment involves very severe methods. To strike fear in his enemy, he used heretofore unexampled severity against those he took captive. The visual impression they left along the roads of Wallachia was something most striking. When Sultan Mehmet II initiated an invasion with a large force, he was surprised by the stark scene he encountered. The Ottomans called him a demon, a monster in armor. To his people, he was a protector, guarding his land using terror as a weapon. He inspired Bram Stoker's creation of Dracula, a knight whose legacy history merged itself with nightmare. Bertrand du Guesclin, the Black Dog of War. One of the deadliest knights to grace France was Bertrand du Guesclin, famously called the Black Dog of Brocéliande. Bertrand was not much to look at, ugly and short, hardly the glamorous image of a knight, but in him resided a ruthless sort of cunning. He rose from minor nobility during the 100 Years' War to the exalted position of Constable of France, commanding armies against the English. It was not so much for sheer brutality that du Guesclin was feared, but for his intelligence. He waged guerrilla warfare, ambushes, raids, and night raids. Some said unbecoming of a knight, but very productive. His slogan was direct: war without fire is like sausages without mustard. Where Bertrand rode, villages went up in flames, soldiers disappeared, and the morale of the English crumbled. His foes dubbed him the Black Dog, relentless, savage, and impossible to be reconciled. Legacy of fear. It is not their skill with the sword unites all these men: Marshal, Richard, the Black Prince, the Templars, Vlad, and Bertrand. Knights were symbols of honor, but they were also human weapons, conquerors and terrorizers. The medieval world was no fairy tale, but a world of the survival of the fittest, where all too often the deadliest knight was the one who ruled the pages of history. The ringing of swords, the uproar of horsemen, the bellowing of men running into war. That was the playlist of the medieval world. Among the myriad soldiers who came and went, a very few stood above all. Their names, Lionheart, Black Prince, Templar, Impaler, speak down the ages. Knights of the sword, knights of fear. Legends.